Good evening. This is Reverend Jason in Ghana, missionary, president of Bible College and Theological Seminary, training pastors and missionaries for Africa. God bless you. Hello to everybody. I'm a UK citizen, married to a Ghanaian lady, and I want to just share some things tonight. And also, I've got a study later on. We'll do a study in 1 Thessalonians after this. We'll do a Bible study in a minute after this video. I want to just give a couple of scriptural references. Psalm 2. Psalm 2 says, "Why do the heathen rage and the people imagine a vain thing? The king of the earth set themselves. The rulers take counsel together against the Lord and against his anointed, saying, Let us break their bands asunder, and cast away their cords from us. He that sitteth in the heavens shall laugh, the Lord shall have them in derision. Then shall he speak unto them in his wrath, and vex them in his sore displeasure. Yet have I sent my King upon the holy hill of Zion. I will declare the decrees the Lord has said unto me. Thou art my son, this day have I begotten thee. Ask of me, and I shall give thee the heathen for thine inheritance, and the uttermost parts of the earth for thy possession. Thou shalt break them with a rod of iron, and thou shalt dash them in pieces alike a potter's vessel." So if you could read Psalm 2, it's about the Son of God. Kiss the Son lest he be angry with you. And I'm just going to have a nice chat about the collapse of Western civilization that we're witnessing at this present time, which I have been saying for a couple of years. I've been saying that we're witnessing the collapse of the West. And there have been people before me, Francis Schaeffer, not in this book, but he wrote a documentary series and a book on the collapse of Western civilization. And there are others that have written of the collapse of the Western civilization. But Francis Schaeffer is someone you could Google, look up his videos on the collapse of Western civilization, and look up his books on the collapse of Western civilization. This book is more to do with the history of Western thought, and is a very, very good book. So he prophesied, foresaw the collapse of the West. And it's very interesting. A book I've been reading recently is The City of God by St. Augustine, and the West collapsed before during the Roman Empire. The barbarians came at the gate, and St. Augustine taught about the collapse of the West. I would encourage you to get hold of Francis Schaeffer books, study them, and give you an understanding of why we've come to the way we have in the West. And this book is essential reading for these times. You really need to get a copy of this book and read it this next week or two, because everything we're seeing at the moment, it's already been in here, in The City of God by St. Augustine. All that's happening now happened in the Roman Empire, and so please get hold of this book, City of God by St. Augustine, and it'll help you to understand our times that we're living in, and Francis Schaeffer, So I'm just having a fireside chat for a few minutes, and then we're going to have a rest for a minute, and then I'm going to start a new video on Bible study. But just some theological framework. From a Christian point of view, God created the world, Adam was created, Adam sinned, the world is fallen, the Messiah comes, God chose the Jewish people as the people that where the Messiah would come from. The Messiah comes out of, is a Jewish Messiah who comes and dies on a cross for us and brings reconciliation with God for us through his life, death and resurrection. And when Christ died at the cross, that was the center of history. From a Christian point of view, the old Adamic world of selfishness, pride and all these things there was a crossover with the cross, with the new kingdom. The kingdom of God came in Christ. And we're now, theologians call it the now but not yet. We're in between the new age and the old age. The new age is Christ and his church and the people of God. And one day he's coming back for his people. In the end times, it talks about things getting worse, wars, earthquakes. It talks about Israel coming back to its land, the Jews coming back to their land, and it talks about a revival of the Jews in Romans 9, 10, 11. And there are these things that are prophesied about the end times, but the end comes and it's Christ who comes back to his people. So that's the historical framework of Christianity. In the midst of that, each of us who are watching this, we're all in our different countries experiencing certain things. And now I want to talk about why the West is collapsing and why Western civilization is deteriorating and how we can get back to some sense and normality. Roman society, when Rome was founded, there is a tradition that the ambassadors of Rome went to Greece to meet a philosopher called Solon. And Solon gave them some rules to start a society. And the tradition has it that the Roman ambassadors got these rules from Solon, and they're kind of like the Ten Commandments, love your neighbor as yourself kind of thing. I kind of think he kind of borrowed it from the Old Testament. But anyhow, tradition has it, they went to Solon, and then they put a brass plate or a plate in Rome, and everybody had to obey these basic laws. It was the rule of law for Roman society. St. Augustine and also a number of eminent politicians and generals near the end of the empire were lamenting that if Roman society, if the Romans, whether it be politicians or whether it be ordinary people, if they don't agree to following the law, then there is no Roman Empire. If you don't agree, they said, to follow the law, there is no Roman Empire. You can't have an empire unless there's a rule of law. And what you're seeing today is you can't have a nation state like America or Britain if people are not willing to obey the law, if there is no rule of law. What we're witnessing at the present time in the West is extreme anarchy. Just recently we've seen at the moment a standoff in Seattle in America where it's been declared an autonomous state. Well, basically what that means is really it's lawlessness, that they're not willing to obey the law, that they're above the law. When that happens, you cease to be a nation. When people cease to obey the law or the rule of law, the nation ceases to be. And that's what led to the collapse of the West in the time of the Roman Empire. People just didn't want to obey the law, whether it be the ordinary people. So you have mob rule. We're seeing this at the moment, mob rule. We're seeing people gathering. They're saying it's because they're against the government, because the government's racist, or the police are racist. But at the end of the day, it's mob rule when you're smashing shops and you're beating people up. Doesn't matter how righteous your cause is, it doesn't give you the right to be a mob where you're beating people up and smashing shops and things like that and desecrating monuments. It's mob rule. And where there's mob rule, the society collapses. And so you can learn a fantastic lesson by reading this book. I'd encourage everybody to read this book by St. Augustine. It's not easy reading. It's a challenge. But every now and again, there's just these amazing little gems that you think, oh, that's happening today. Oh, that's happening today. So it's not easy reading. You gotta keep plodding on. Um, but it's up to date reading, fascinating reading. And the thesis of Saint Augustine and Roman thinkers of the time when Rome collapsed is the same thesis that Francis Schaeffer gave. Francis Schaeffer, in his documentary, I think it's called How Should We Then Live? I think that's what the documentary was called. Um, yeah, How Should We Then Live, I think. He goes through the history of the West, and he shows that when you kick out the Ten Commandments, when you kick out the laws of God in a nation, you get mob rule, and then governments begin to become fascist. They start to put in draconian laws, you know. And that's what we're seeing. We're seeing governments become more fascist, and we're seeing mob rule and more fascism, mob rule and more fascism. This is a sign of the collapse of the West. Um, so I'm going to do some history to share some key issues of why our Western society is collapsing, and then just give some thoughts about how we can move forward. The West has been for over 2,000 years. Well, for 2,000 years have been influenced by Judeo-Christianity. Before that, it was influenced by the Greco-Roman Empire, and then influenced by the Babylonian Empire and the Persians. Yeah. So the Greek civilization has had a big impact on the West in terms of its intellectual foundations. Aristotle and Plato have been major players in Western thinking and Western culture. They played a massive role. But the other foundation of Western society has been Judeo-Christianity. And is whether you agree with that history or whether you don't agree with that history, Jürgen Habermas, one of the great atheist intellectuals of Europe, has said that our basic moral foundations of the West were rooted in Christianity. So whether you agree with it or not, Christianity, whether you agree with the history of the West or not from a Christian point of view, you cannot deny that Christianity has had an impact and influence on our culture and history. So much so that there's been some basic foundations, and I think one of the basic foundations of Western society was we were made in the image of God. Because we were made in the image of God, we had certain rights in terms of we had to respect one another. So that was an important teaching. The doctrine that God created the world was an important teaching because it gave people a sense of moral responsibility, that there was a heaven and hell. That kept society cohesive in that way. The Bible played a massive role. The Bible, especially the King James Bible, had a massive impact on our culture. You read William Shakespeare's works. It's dotted. It's full of the King James. So the King James version of the Bible and the Bible had a huge impact on British culture and Western civilization, given its moral basis and its moral foundation. And then when you look at our kings and queens in the past, there were battles between Catholicism and Protestantism, and then there was the leaving of the Puritans going to America, and that was a major important landmark in Western civilization, the formation of America, and then the development of the British Empire especially in the 19th century. So you had the founding of America, the British Empire. These were landmark times in Western civilization. And Christianity was at the very forefront, at the very heart of these things. So, for example, in America, the founding fathers, a lot of atheists and skeptics try to brush this under the carpet, but it's true that Christianity had a big impact on the Constitution of America. And Christianity had a big impact on the political and social fabric of United Kingdom. So, for example, Queen Victoria was influenced by Christianity. Gladstone was influenced by Christianity. Much of the 17th century revival had a big impact with John Wesley, Whitefield, and in America, Jonathan Edwards. These revival movements sunk deep into Western culture, Western civilization. But then in the 1700s, you had the Enlightenment. You had Immanuel Kant, a philosopher. You had David Hume, a skeptic, a rationalist, or an empiricist. And the Enlightenment was like the exaltation of reason above tradition. And there was an ongoing challenge to Christianity through the Enlightenment. Some of these enlightened thinkers were deists. They didn't quite reject Christianity, but they still had a semblance of a belief in God. But already in the Enlightenment in the 1700s, you had these two kind of movements growing, principally in Europe. It hadn't impacted America as much in the 1700s. But you had Immanuel Kant, you had David Hume, you had other rationalists and empiricists saying that by reason we can discover knowledge, and there were scientific discoveries. And then you had the Industrial Revolution. But alongside the Enlightenment, alongside the Industrial Revolution, Christianity had revival movements that were spread all across the Western Hemisphere. Our education system, our universities, were steeped in Christianity. But things rapidly began to change with the advent of evolution. With the advent of evolution, that was a serious attack on the Bible and attack upon Christianity, because, as Huxley said, who was a friend of Charles Darwin at the time, there were a number of Huxleys in the generations to come, but the first Huxley, he said we can use this evolution to destroy the established church. So there was this movement when Charles Darwin's theory of evolution came to use it as a battering ram against Christianity, and it began to have a potent and powerful effect in secularizing Western civilization. Meanwhile, in Germany and in France, there'd already been a rationalistic movement in France with the French Revolution in, I think it was coming into the 1700s to the 1800s. There was going a rationalistic movement that was attacking the church and wanting rationalism and reason, and it didn't turn out good for the rationalists. You had the Reign of Terror in France, but in Germany you did have a rationalistic movement that brought in biblical criticism, using rationalism to critique the Bible. So rather than standing on the authority of the Bible for epistemology, for an understanding of reality and understanding of morality, German scholars were busy in the academies, in the universities, and in the theological seminaries, hammering away at the Bible. So you had what is called the Wallhausen hypothesis, which was like a bombshell against the Bible, where Wallhausen said Moses didn't write it, there was JP and different authors. And these theories rapidly spread in the universities of Germany and Europe. We're talking about the 17th, 18th, and 19th century now. And this had a massive impact on secularizing the West and pushing Christianity out. So by the time we get to the end of the 19th century, there had been massive secularization going on because of evolution and because of biblical criticism. When I mean biblical criticism, I mean a criticism that was inventing theories to try and look at the sources of the Bible. This affected the theological seminaries and it affected the churches. So many churches started to become secularized. The Congregationalists in the UK became secularized. Churches in Germany and France became secularized. A lot of them lost their evangelical fire. So by the time you come to the end of the 19th century, there was a hollowness in some of the mainline denominations in Europe, such as the Presbyterians, the Congregationalists, and the Anglicans. There was many liberal scholars and liberal ministers that were not preaching Orthodox Christianity. So secularization was well underway. It didn't rapidly move as fast in America. It took a bit longer. But we have the Enlightenment, which was pushing out Christianity. Then we had biblical criticism that was pushing out Christianity. Then we had evolution that was pushing out Christianity. So by the time you get to the end of the 19th century, Christianity had been battered all over the place. The church was extremely weak in the West because of these battles with the Enlightenment and evolution and biblical criticism. New disciplines were growing, such as sociology, anthropology, psychology, and there was this feeling that coming into the 20th century, mankind will sort out problems. We don't need religion, we have science. When we come into the 20th century, the early 20th century, Europe went under a humongous crisis. We had the First World War, which was a shattering blow to Western civilization. It challenged the prevailing Christianity of the day, which was not Christianity, it was liberalism. The liberalism of the day was shown to be hollow. It was shown that it didn't have anything to offer for the times. That the church was not strong at that time. So in the First World War, that really brought a lot of skepticism to Western society, because people, young boys, young men were dying in the trenches, going back to America, going back to UK, going back to Belgium, going back to France, and people were in despair. They just couldn't understand. There was a lot of intellectual doubt, a lot of poems that had been written in the 19th century which were coming from doubt, seeped into early 20th century culture. And there were poems written and plays written that were expressing this crisis of faith and doubt that was coming in 1914, 1915, 1916. America by this time was full speed ahead in the Industrial Revolution and was becoming a superpower, while Britain was slowly receding in its empire. Then, during this time, as you know, the German people had a lot of things put on them by the West. They had to pay the West back for the First World War, which made the German people unhappy, which prepared the way for Hitler. Hitler was able to come to power because the church in Germany was basically extremely weak. And Europe was weak on its Christian foundation, so Hitler was able to manipulate German people because the German churches were not strong enough to stand against what he was saying. And the Nazis came in And we had the Second World War, which was catastrophic. This again had a massive impact on faith. Many people lost their faith, but many found their faith. About after the Second World War, the world fell into a dark time with communism and the Cold War, with the issue of nuclear weapons. During that time, there was a strong communist world, with you have China and Russia, and then you had these proxy wars like Vietnam and little proxy wars in Cuba and places like that. But you had in the 1960s a massive event, and it was the sexual revolution in America and in Britain and in the West, where there was a throwing off of the old values. There was a complete getting rid of any tradition, getting rid of Christianity, getting rid of everything, experimenting with drugs, experimenting with sex, throwing out Christian marriage, throwing out all the old values. Then in the 1980s, you had the collapse of the Berlin Wall. And by now, in America, from the 60s and 70s, there was an evangelical resurgence. People like Francis Schaeffer and others have been able to set up seminaries and built an evangelical stronghold in America, but the rest of Europe was extremely weak Christian-wise. When the collapse of the Berlin Wall fell, it fell, by the way, because of the Catholics in Poland. Never forget that. It was we all bashed the Catholics. Everybody bashes the Catholics for all but we should never forget that the collapse of the Berlin Wall was down to the Polish Catholics. Yeah, it was they who challenged, principally challenged the communists. So anyhow, there was the collapse of the Berlin Wall. And it seemed like Marxism was defeated. It looked like Marxism was finished. But there was a quiet revolution going on, and this is the coming now to our times of the collapse of the Western civilization now. There was a quiet revolution going on. We'd already had feminism and neo-colonial studies, racist studies, and all this was developing in the 60s with postmodern thinkers like Derrida and Foucault and others. But with the collapse of the communists in the 1980s, the Marxists didn't give up. The Marxists went underground. They went under the radar. The Marxists went into Western universities. And they thought, well, we haven't lost. We'll go underground. We'll go under the radar and we'll capture the universities and we'll educate the new generation of people to bring down the West. So in America and in Britain, there was a quiet revolution going on. And what the neo-Marxists were doing is professors in universities in the 60s and 70s I'm going to have to do the Bible study tomorrow because I've got enough data to finish this video for half an hour. I haven't got enough data to finish it to do a Bible study. I've got a Bible study here because I know some of you prefer the Bible studies. So maybe I'll do a Bible study tomorrow, but I'll be street preaching tomorrow, so I'll be filming street preaching, so you'll see that. So anyhow, the Marxists didn't give up. They went underground in the West, and they went into the universities. They became professors. They began to undermine it, and their strategy was, right, what we'll do is we'll bring up race and sex and undermine the last vestiges of the Judeo-Christian culture, and we'll destroy the history of Western civilization, and then we'll implant our own ideologies of what we think we should do. So a lot of teacher training study manuals, when people were being trained to be teachers, these neo-Marxists would bring up race as an issue. This is in the 1960s or 70s. They would bring up race as an issue, sex and gender. So they want to talk about gay rights, feminism, and all this. And it was all a plot to undermine Judeo-Christianity, in the last vestiges of it, in Western culture, and to destroy the nation states, to destroy their history, to destroy their culture. And people loved it. They lapped up the feminism. They lapped up the debates about racism. They lapped up the debates about gay rights and all that. It was fantastic, but what was happening was the dismantling of Western civilization was well underway, the final vestiges of it, in the 60s and 70s, with this neo-Marxist revolution in our universities. So feminism, gay rights, racist debates were the perfect tools that these neo-Marxists were using to undermine the traditional family, to undermine British life, Western civilization, American civilization, the Western civilization, which was Judeo-Christian culture. Tragically, in the 60s and 70s, there was an entertainment culture, and the American people, many of the American people, many of the British people, and other Western countries became so enamored with greed and sexual licentiousness and all the trappings of what worldly pleasures could give, that they were not wanting to pay attention to their past history, Judeo-Christian culture and history, and their faith. They weren't too bothered about that. They weren't interested in it anymore. They were too busy having sex and too busy trying to get by, too busy trying to earn money, and it was fueled. Greed was fueled in America. It was fueled in you remember in UK, everybody had them big mobile phones, Del Boy, you know, with his big mobile phone and all that. Yeah, but the Beatles are dead and Jesus is alive, bro. Beatles is dead and Jesus is alive. So this neo-Marxist revolution was going on behind the scenes, and it was a Trojan horse in the West. No one was seeing it. No one was. At the same time, by the time you get to the 1980s, Europe had become developed from the 1950s up to 1980s. Had become a kind of conglomerate of nations, and people were beginning to get an idea of having a united Europe. And then you had the internet beginning, but then the last 15 to 20 years, the chickens have come home to roost. This quiet revolution that was going on in the 60s and 70s by these neo-Marxists is now coming in the next 20 years, 80s, 1990, 1980, 1990s, 2000. It's now coming home to roost. the what they were planning is now perfected. So as the social media begin to develop, it seemed to be a wild west. People were people were really excited about it, but they had this neo-Marxist globalist agenda by billionaires who kind of feel that they're kind of messianic people who feel that they can run nation states better. They feel that nation states aren't valuable anymore, that there should be one nation in the whole world, a kind of globalist outfit. And these billionaires like Bill Gates and people like that, Soros, they had an agenda for to scrap the nation states. And they were happy to use this neo-Marxist Trojan horse that had come in our Western culture. And so you can see that, for example, with Black Lives Matter, you can see how that is a neo-Marxist outfit. You can see how Soros finances it, and how it's how he's using it to try and bring his new world order to destroy America, to destroy Britain, to destroy. You can see Bill Gates using the COVID-19 and in a way, you know, a masterstroke of destroying democracies where free speeches and our constitutions have been swept under the carpet. So our Western Judeo-Christianity was thrown under the bus. Our political leaders and people in America and the UK were not bothered about the Christian values anymore. They were happy to go along with their new values. Abortion came in the 60s, gay rights came in, and feminism was rife. All these new disciplines, neo-colonialism, where you attack your own history and denigrate your own history. The history of nations was not taught properly in the schools, so people's understanding of where they came from was taken away from them. They weren't taught about their British history, they weren't taught about their American history, they were taught black studies, colonial, post-colonial studies, whatever. So people were not taught about their own history. Once you don't know your history, you don't know who you are, you can be manipulated and controlled. That's what the Nazis did. They took control of the history, the education system, and how people were to be educated in their history. And these globalists contrived with the internet. So you have Facebook, you have YouTube. Over the last few years are beginning to kick in with this neo-Marxist identity politics to take away our freedom. And then our politicians are complicit in this. They're also trying to destroy cultures by allowing vast amounts of people from other countries, from third world countries, to come into Europe and in America to destroy the culture, all to make a new world order. So you have vast amounts of Muslims that have been let in Germany, in France and in Britain, and the whole point of it is part of this neo-Marxist identity politics to destroy nation states, to start a new world globalist order. But it all comes down to this. It all comes down to this, that Western civilization, just as the Roman Empire left the rule of law, Western civilization has slowly eroded away from the idea of the rule of law. So we don't have free speech anymore. We don't have any rights anymore. We can't even go out anymore without the permission of the government. We can't even say what we want anymore. You can't go and preach freely in the West like you used to. There was just the other day, a man went preaching in Seattle, and the Antifa grabbed him and choked him, and he passed out. The media are complicit in this neo-Marxist revolution. The whole media is happy. All this racism that's supposedly around, that's neo-Marxist identity politics, purely designed to destroy nation states, to tear it down. And this tearing down of monuments, this tearing down, taking autonomous space, it's nothing but Marxist ideology dressed up in Black Lives Matter. That's all it is. And it's designed to destroy the last vestiges of Western civilization. So that's my take of why we're in this situation. We're in this situation because we lost who we were. We lost our history. We lost the history of Britain, the history of America. We lost the history of Europe. We lost our Judeo-Christian values. We lost our faith in our God. We enjoyed pleasure, and as we enjoyed our pleasure and enjoyed ourselves over the last 30 years, people came with Trojan horses. They came under the radar. They infiltrated our universities. They infiltrated our political system. They infiltrated our media. And they worked tirelessly to undermine our societies with neo-Marxist identity politics, using gay rights, using racism, and using feminism as a screen. But underneath it was a revolution going on. The revolution was to destroy democracy and destroy capitalism, and to put it in its place a socialist utopia, which in reality is nothing but a fascist state built on hate and violence and mob rule. And we've seen that recently. These people who claim that they're defending against racism, they've now got control of Seattle. Now they are policing. How are they policing? They are policing worse than any police. They are, but they've choked him nearly to death. They're beating people up on the streets who they do not agree with. This is just mob rule. This is what the utopia, socialist utopia, is aiming to bring. China has been complicit in the downfall of Western civilization. China has been complicit in preparing and helping the downfall. Billionaires have been complicit in helping this, trying to bring this new world order. And the result of it is the collapse of Western civilization. So how do we fight back? How do we deal with this? One aspect of this is we have to face the fact that we've gone beyond reason and rationality and debate. Now, I would say that the way to fight back, and I think this has to be the main way, the three main ways, I think, is one, by reason and debate. Those who have the strongest ideas will win. So we have to defend Christianity in the public sphere. There has to be apologists, and people start to learn the faith, come to a saving knowledge of Jesus Christ, and defend the faith. So we need politicians, we need academics, we need we need people to go and defend the faith. We have to win the battle of ideas. Islam is fastly pumping out at the moment attacks upon the Bible. We need people who are going to defend the faith. We need strong believers who are going to, in the public arena, who are going to robustly defend the Christian faith. It's time we do this. But not just, we need robust orthodoxy. Read Francis Schaeffer. He was a man of orthodoxy. He didn't undermine inerrancy. We need people in the public sphere, politicians, academics, preachers, pastors, apologists, social workers, psychologists, philosophers, doctors, police officers, generals, whatever, everyone in public sphere. You have to stand up for your faith and vigorously defend it. and win the battle of ideas. So you need to know your faith and be able to defend it in the public sphere. Secondly, we need a massive reformation in the church. The church needs to reform itself. The church, it says in the Bible, the church has to stand up and be strong in its faith. The church is becoming infiltrated by neo-Marxist identity politics. The Southern Baptist Theological Seminary in America, it's been infiltrated by neo-Marxist identity politics. Many in the church are becoming woke. They've been influenced by all this Black Lives Matter and all this feminism and gay rights and all that. The church needs to become strong again in the doctrine of the Word of God. And so if you turn with me to Matthew chapter 28, verse 9. So he says, Go ye therefore and teach all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and of the Holy Ghost, teaching them to observe all the things whatsoever I have commanded you, and lo, I am with you always. There needs to be a massive reformation in the church, where the church is a disciple in church, where people are being taught the Bible and the doctrines of the Word of God, and being trained in sound theology and biblical teaching. There needs to be an urgent reformation in the West. So Bible study groups, all in houses, everywhere, schools, colleges, universities, everywhere you can. You need to start Bible study groups and begin the Trojan horse again. Just like the neo-Marxists did the Trojan horse. We need to do the Trojan horse. Bring in the Word of God in Bible studies, in universities, colleges, everywhere where we can, and undermine our culture, that our neo-Marxist culture that's come in, with new disciples that are going to stand up and be strong. We need to do this. We need an urgent reformation in discipleship. Bible study groups, cell groups, all across the Western Hemisphere. Everywhere, in houses, in colleges, in universities, in churches, everywhere. New Bible study groups has to be started, and a serious systematic study of the Bible and its teaching, rooted in the Word. A third thing that needs to be done is evangelism. There needs to be continual evangelism, giving out free Bibles around America, around Western Hemisphere, Britain, Europe, free Bibles, free DVDs. There has to be a massive evangelistic push. Massive evangelism has to be done. This has to go on massively, pushing out everywhere. There has to be giving out Bibles, swamping America, swamping Europe with Bibles and DVDs and books and any literature that we can get out to the masses and get our message out. This is urgent, that there has to be a massive influx of evangelists and missionaries to Europe and giving out Bibles everywhere. Fourthly, there needs to be an urgent prayer and holiness. The church has to live the Christian life. The church urgently needs to be a holy people. We mustn't be influenced by the politics of the day, but we must be holy people who are willing to stand for righteousness and godliness. So the church needs to be a praying church and a holy church. These are 4 bulwarks that we can do. And the 5th bulwark is terrible to contemplate, but it has to be on the cards. And that is this. I fear that this neo-Marxist identity politics has lost rationality. They do not want to reason. They have decided that anybody who disagrees with them cannot be reasoned with. So the only option for them is violence, is to poleaxe you out of the way. So we have to face the fact that those who are Christian, those who are on the right of politics, that our days are numbered in that they want to poleaxe us. They want to beat the living daylights out of us. They've decided that we're not people to be reasoned with. We're not people to debate. that we're racist, homophobic, whatever, and they're going to beat it out of us. We see that in Seattle. So we have to face the fact, and this is a very solemn thing to say, but we have to face the fact that if a group of people have decided that they're going to beat us to death, and the police will not come and defend us, and abandon our city-states, like we see in Seattle, and our politicians are not willing to defend us, like we saw in London, with Sadiq Khan allowing the riots to go on, and the police not being properly equipped, and the police... It has to be on the cards that there comes a point that we have to face the fact that we have to defend ourselves. And that's a very, very solemn thing to say. But politicians in America, politicians in the UK, judges in America, judges in the UK, have the right before God, and generals, judges, officials in government and society, if they see the barbarians at the gates and other officials abandoning their duty, they have a right to defend innocent people. So, for example, if the British government steps back, if, say, Antifa captured Birmingham and set up a state in Birmingham, and the British government was not willing to defend the Birmingham people, and the British Army was not willing to defend the Birmingham people, and the police force were not willing to defend the Birmingham people, then a judge or a general or some official has a right to form militia and go in and defend the people of Birmingham. The same in America. If the American army will not go into Seattle, or the police will not defend the Seattle people, then an official in America has the right to form militia and go and defend the people of Seattle. That's in the Westminster Confession of Faith, if you read the Westminster Confession of Faith. States cannot be abandoned to lawlessness. So, if a mayor in Seattle does not stop the violence, and the police leave Seattle to the mob, and the Home Guard will not go in, or the American army will not go in, then if there are people, officials in government in Seattle who do not agree with the mayor, they have a right to formulate militia and sweep out the people who are doing mob rule. If the police won't do it, if the army, the American army won't do it, then officials have a right to formulate militia and sweep them out. And the same goes for the UK. So the onus is on the government in America and Britain to stand up for the rule of law. And if they fail to stand up for the rule of law, then government officials that want to stand up for the rule of law have a right to formulate militia and defend the people. They can't be left to the mob to be butchered by a load of Antifa nut jobs who have taken over cities. That's the reality. It's either that or watch the whole of Western civilization collapse into the hands of mob rule. You know, so we need to. So this is serious stuff. I mean, this is serious stuff. What the Soros and all these billionaires have done by instigating these riots and causing all this division in our Western civilization and causing all this violence. If our governments don't step in and stand up for the rule of law, then the people have to formulate their own defense, set up their own defenses. Now that cannot be done just by any Tom, Dick and Harry. It has to be done, according to the Westminster Confession, it has to be done by people who are official. If you have the British police force abandoning London to the mob, and the British Army abandoning London to the mob, and people are walking the streets and they're being beaten up and killed, if it gets to that point and they cordon off parts of London and say it's autonomous, and the Prime Minister and the politicians don't do anything, and the same in America, then an MP, a judge, a general, someone who of stature, morally speaking, who wants righteousness and the rule of law, has a right to create their own militia and defend the rights of the majority of people and the freedoms of the constitution of that nation, if the politicians are not doing their job. So these people these mayors that are sitting back and allowing the mobs to rule, the police forces that are standing back and allowing cities to be taken over, is extremely irresponsible. In Seattle at the moment, go in there and the guns should be taken off Antifa and they should be arrested as terrorists. They should not be allowed to have autonomous state in Seattle. So it's a derelict of duty on the authorities, not only of Seattle, but also of the whole collective America and President Trump. I love President Trump. I think he's amazing. But even President Trump, I can understand why he doesn't want to send people in. But he has to. The rule of law has to be held up. If you don't uphold the rule of law, you have no America. It's as simple as that. Oliver Cromwell rose to prominence because lawlessness was reigning, and America needs an Oliver Cromwell if things get worse and worse, and Britain needs an Oliver Cromwell if things get worse. So we need to do our part spiritually, doing discipleship. We need to do our part preaching the gospel, spreading the gospel, but then the politicians have to defend the rights have to defend the law. And if there are politicians that are abandoning that duty, and police that abandon that duty, and the army that abandon that duty, then who is to step into place? Officials who believe in the rule of law have a right to make a stand and call upon those who will stand with them to uphold the rule of law. And those soldiers, those police that fail to uphold the rule of law, that is a dereliction of duty, and you have no authority. You are there to uphold the rule of law. You're to uphold justice and righteousness and to maintain the peace. But if you're allowing people to take over cities with machine guns, terrorizing people, and cordoning off Seattle, and you're allowing that, then my friends, you're storing up revolution. You're playing into the hands of these revolutionaries. They should be quickly disarmed, quickly put in prison, and they should be tried as terrorists, and let peace and order reign, and let the police and the army and the politicians do their duty. But this behavior that politicians are doing in the West, in America and in UK, you're playing a very, very, very dangerous game. You're seriously creating a very, very, very dangerous game. Very, very dangerous. You're putting the Western civilization on the very edge of collapse and pushing it to civil war with your stupidity. And it's just blind stupidity. These are a small minority. Antifa are a small minority, and they have hijacked the Black Lives Matter, and they are creating havoc in America. They're creating havoc in the UK, and they have to be quickly stamped on. They have to be not noticed as terrorists. They have to be put in prison and disarmed, and let peace and righteousness and order reign. Because if it's not, if they continue to cordon off cities and have Kalashnikovs and machine guns in Seattle and other places like they're doing, then you're creating the scenario of a civil war. Because, God forbid, but if there are 300 right-wing militia in America, if just one of those right-wing militia decides to go and defend Seattle, you could have a civil war on your hands. So you need to think about it, and the British public, the British government need to think about it, what they're doing. This is madness. You're pushing Britain and the West to the brink of collapse with this nonsense. But people have to be prepared. Judges, generals, officers, which troops are going to come with me, and we will take out these people, because we can't have it anymore. And they have a right to do that, to uphold the law and order and the constitution of the nation states. Otherwise anarchy will rule. Okay? If my theological basis for this is the Westminster Confession. If you read the Westminster Confession, it talks about judges and rulers. If a nation begins to be immoral and the political leaders are not doing their job, other political leaders have a right to defend the people, and it's in the Westminster Confession. So the theological framework for what I was saying is there. All right. God bless you. These are dangerous and very, very dark times. The West is seriously heading for collapse because of the absolute mindlessness of our Western governments. They are complicit in the demise. The media, our politicians, our civil services, our academics, the majority, they're all involved and complicit in trying to collapse Western civilization. And we as Christians have a duty to do our part in preaching the gospel, defending the faith intellectually, and the politicians have a right to defend the rule of law and uphold nation states, and they have a right to do that. They have a right to formulate militia if they need to uphold the rule of law. If politicians and those who are supposed to be defending the rule of law are involved in a dereliction of duty, like we see the police, we see the mayor, we see the police, and we see the army in Seattle, the Home Guard, all three have absolved their responsibility. And now you have in Seattle militia, Antifa militia, armed to the teeth, holding a city to ransom. This is madness beyond madness, beyond madness, beyond madness. This is opening a Pandora box that is going to blow up in everybody's faces if people don't react, go in, disarm them, put them in court as terrorists, put them in prison, and this nonsense not happen again. It's not about if this George who died, it was horrible what happened to him, but let the rule of law take place. Don't you be the judge and jury. Let the courts deal with it. Otherwise, America and Britain will collapse. The Roman Empire collapsed because they abandoned the rule of law. The rule of law is our protection for our freedoms. It says in law, don't steal. That's there to protect us. Okay? It says in the law not to murder each other. That's there to protect us. You abandon these laws, and that's the end of it. God bless you. Take care.